Ward 7 NPA meeting, and welcome back to winter. It feels like outside. I went and moved my car. Ooh. What happened to 57 degrees today? I wanted to go over the ground rules for us. Listen to others speaking, respect the agenda and process, share your opinion politely, treat people respectfully. Wanted to also say that we're not doing our round robin introductions, but if you do ask a question or make a comment, to share your name, street, or neighborhood when asking a question, or share a comment through the evening. Tonight, Olivia is going to be helping me with timekeeping, keeping us honest and on schedule. So thank you, Olivia Taylor. We'll start off with announcements. If anyone has any announcements, I heard Robert say, if it can disturb your eating, that you did have an announcement, Robert.
Well, all I want to say is that I've been spending much more of my bandwidth in the past 2 weeks on the state redistricting than on the city ward redistricting. I kind of wish that Bob Hooper or Carol Odie or somebody was, especially Bob Hooper is on the House Government Operations Committee. So the big news that happened is originally we thought we were going to get 10 House representatives for Burlington. We deserve 10.43 representatives. That's what our portion of the population of the state is, and out of 150 House reps. And the first map that was coming from the Legislative Apportionment Board was rounding us down to 10. That was, to me, no surprise. That's what I thought. And then there was the big battle of single member districts versus a mixture of 2-member and single member districts. It pretty much is clear that the legislature isn't going for the single member district idea, or the all single member district idea. And the Burlington Board of Civil Authority had voted to either go 10 single member or 5 2-member districts to be consistent. They voted on that, and then 2 days after they voted on that, the House Government Operations Committee came up with, hey, Burlington's getting 11 members instead of 10. And the District 6-2, which is Emma Mulvey-Stanik's district, is going to remain a single member district, but District 6-6, which is Barbara Rachelson's district, is going to go to a 2-member district. And they drew a map, and I tried to get the attention of the Board of Civil Authority before the 14th. I thought, in fact, that they were going to meet on the 14th to consider what precisely a map that they were going to recommend to the state. That didn't happen. And so the state, being the mommy government, drew the map. And we are now going to be stuck with the map that somebody not in Burlington drew. And it's not a bad map, but there are some warts in it that could have been fixed with some local input. I did provide the House Government Operations Committee a map to look at, but since I'm only one person and a schlub and not on the Board of Civil Authority, they did not act on it. So I just want to let you know that that was going on. A problem with the map is that it's putting a line down Maple Street, and something that we've learned in the redistricting committee is that putting a line down Maple Street or putting a line down King Street is maybe not a very good idea. But that's something to worry about later. That's all I wanted to say.
Thanks, Robert. Any other announcements? Is that a hand, Jeff? No.
No, just more of a thank you gesture.
Oh, okay. All right. No other announcements. Emma, I will give you the floor. We were going to divide up the elected officials' state reps 3 ways. Since Carol and Bob aren't here, you could have 6 minutes.
Because I do have to do like 30 minutes then. Wow. I will answer what I had planned to go over tonight because Bob Hooper does serve on GovOps, but there's a lot of Burlington specific stuff as Robert was just sort of mentioning that have been going through GovOps. So if they still haven't signed on and we're wrapping up, I'm happy to answer questions and pivot to redistricting or the charter changes. But I was going to assume that Bob was going to cover that, but I'll go back to that if there's time and I'm still the only one. So hello, everyone. I'm Representative Emma Mulvaney-Stanek, represent Chittenden 6-2, which is half of the new North End and half of the old North End, sort of the southern tiers of the Ward 4 and 7 for your purposes. And I serve on the House Commerce and Economic Development Committee in the House. And we are barreling really quickly towards crossover, which is the policy deadline for bills to cross from the House to the Senate. Of course, apparently there are exceptions, of course, and then there are these things I was just told called Frankenstein bills or zombie bills or something. So there's other ways for policy to move, but by and large, like 90% of what we've been working on for the first half of the session needs to be wrapped up by March 11th and pass over to the Senate from the House perspective and vice versa. Money bills have a little bit of a later deadline, but that's why a lot of us are working hard right up to town meeting break and then after town meeting break. So House Commerce sort of acts as a mini money committee, and we tend to also work on only a handful of bills because we put a lot into a very large omnibus bill. And there's 2 themes that we work on: workforce development and economic development. And workforce development is what the House has been working on first half of the session. The Senate, our comparable committee, has been working on in the Senate, the economic development omnibus bill this session. And so workforce has been the big focus. If you want to follow along with that work, a very massive bill called H703 is the sort of the vehicle for which we're putting in probably at least 20, if not more, ideas around various ways we can leverage all this, one-time federal money in programs that exist now and programs that various partners are trying to stand up. They are, themes will be familiar for folks who might be involved at all in workforce development around apprenticeships and internships and trying to make sure on-the-job training is available and well-resourced in the state. We are also trying to make sure there's some sort of, at least I am, parity and sense of all the different scholarships and loan programs we have out there, and making sure parity, meaning because some require you to stay in Vermont for a couple of years, some don't, some have a certain amount, some have higher amounts. So really pulling it all together and having some consistency so we can really leverage those in a smart way with the critical occupations that Vermont needs to fill. And there's about 60 to 66 or so of them that the Department of Labor has designated. And a lot of them are, again, in familiar fields that you'll be probably familiar with, and nursing is a big one. Childcare, early educators is another one. So really trying to be strategic around using apprenticeship, internships, and scholarship and loans, as I mentioned, in ways that will make an impact. I have been asked within that bill to focus on justice involved individuals and really looking at removing barriers for folks who have some sort of involvement with the justice system. They could have either served time in one of our facilities or have just some sort of record. And that is a true economic barrier for folks to both gain employment, but also there's lots of studies we've been hearing testimony on around economic, like a wealth gap for folks who've been justice involved. So we're looking at things like expungement. I sat in on House Judiciary today. There's a bill moving there that will just be yet another tool to really look at how we get Vermonters to work and in sustainable ways. One other thing that I'll just mention, and then as I said, I'll happy to pivot to other state rep stuff if my colleagues don't appear, is around technical education. So CTE is something we've been talking a lot about, which stands for the Center for Technical Education, CTE. Yes, I think that's what it stands for. Sorry, long day. And the technical education world we do it in a very Vermont kind of way compared to other states. We're a little bit of Massachusetts, a little bit of New York, a little bit of Ohio, and how we model it. And for Burlington, we have one of the regional, Burlington Essex are the regional technical centers for Chittenden County, but there are independent technical centers. There are others who are structured differently. And we're trying to understand governance and funding. And I won't go too into the details, but it's a bit of a challenge to figure out how to make sure that money that gets sent, thank you, they have to get sent because money follows the student. And so sometimes it's drawing resources from the sending school in order for a kid to enroll in technical education. So we're trying to really unpack, is that the best way to structure funding for technical education when we know many kids want to access technical education, but sometimes are prohibited because schools are worried about losing too many resources. And it's a pretty volatile way of funding technical education centers. So we're diving into that. We're trying to look at what other states have done and figure out if the governance structure as well might be something to start looking at, so that we have just best practice around the state and not all these different models and how we structure it. So I think I'll pause there and I'll just see if there's questions on anything I covered. And I'm not going to draw out the clock by any means, but if people want me to pivot into charter change, I'm happy to do so, because I did do quite a bit of leadership on that for the Burlington delegation along with Sarah. But I'll pause there and see if there's questions. Commerce is dry, so maybe I lulled you all to sleep, early sleep at 7:11. Yeah. Well, I don't know if I'm supposed to call on people, Jeff. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, Emma, so following up on your comment about for tech education, that money following the students, I have to admit, I've kind of lost track. Is that consistent with how the rest of education fund money is allocated, for regular school districts, or are there constraints for regular, students in terms of the money following the students?
Well, because we fund education, we send all of our money to the state and they send it back out in a per pupil formula. And then I'm not going to give you like the 4-hour lesson on education funding, because I couldn't even give it. And I've gone through it like 4,000 times and I still couldn't teach it to someone quite yet. So there's also grants and other things that come to the district like Burlington, but essentially it is on a per pupil funding basis. So if a kid moves from Burlington High School and goes to Burlington Tech Center, or Essex Tech Center for that matter, that money travels with that student and then gets spent at that tech center, or helps fund that tech center. So and I'm looking at my school commissioners because I don't want to speak out of turn, but if, let's just say, like 500 kids from Burlington High School want to go, that's a little problematic to lose 500 per pupil head count. Again, it's a little more complicated than that. As wonderful as that would be, right now the funding systems is a disincentive for a lot of districts to lose that many kids to go to a tech center all at once. And it's a struggle, because we know, and we want as a value and goal for the state, to encourage kids to use these great programs, because it's really a career readiness opportunity for students. Not all students need to go to college or want to go to college and take on student debt. There's a lot of win-win things if we can figure out the funding and governance pieces, so that it's takes the pressure off of districts where there would be any like quote unquote loss because a student decides to go to the tech center rather than the high school. I hope Kendra's not like staring bullets at me. I hope that, oh, thank God. Okay, good.
Well, Carol, I see you have joined us. Welcome. Emma gave us an update. Would you like us to give us a 2-minute update?
Sure. I'd like to talk about something I think is very exciting, and it is the creating a Vermont child tax credit. There was a federal child tax credit that just expired the end of last year, and it put money directly into the wallets and checkbooks of families with children. It is credited with helping people pay rent and buy food, and reducing food insecurity by 25%. And for parents with more income, the credit has helped with mortgage payments and credit card, student loan, and car debt. So H510 passed the House in February, and it would create a Vermont version of the child tax credit. The payment of $100 a month for every child age 6 and under would lift families with young children out of poverty, and would encourage young families to move to Vermont or to stay in Vermont and thrive. So we are really trying to focus with this bill on young families, addressing 2 important challenges: reducing poverty for young children and meeting our demographic challenges. Also in that bill is an increase in Social Security tax exemption to improve on changes we made 3 years ago. Anyone living exclusively on Social Security receives those benefits tax-free. But this bill would allow moderate income seniors to use their payments for food and other living expenses. As of early March, this bill is being considered in the Senate. And how many minutes do I still have?
30
I'll
seconds.
tell you one more thing. And Vermont continues to welcome refugees fleeing violence in other nations. And we want to ensure that our tax system supports Vermonters who step up to host refugees in their homes. And H 461 passed the House, and it would exclude the income of new refugees from the calculation of household income for the purpose of property tax relief. And I have other nice news too, but that's it. And I thought Emma did a great job with explaining that school funding thing, even though I came in a little late.
Carol, do you know if Bob will be joining us, or I know
No,
you guys
I
are in
don't.
session and
I don't know.
okay. Any questions for Emma or Carol from the group?
Well, Jeff, if I can just say 2 seconds on the charters, because it's just so Burlington specific. And so just very quickly, excited to report that both just cause eviction and thermal energy passed third reading in the House in the last couple of days. The thermal energy passed today, and they move on to the Senate. Thermal went through without any amendments, and just cause eviction had a few minor amendments in the end, which we were glad to have the help of the city, especially Councilor Carpenter and the city attorney and a few others to really help advocate and push that across the line. So that moves to the Senate, and then we will see what the governor does, and then the city can start the ordinance process along those items. The last item is the ranked choice voting for city council races. That has not been taken up yet by GovOps, but I was told it will be addressed around town meeting. So hopefully that makes the policy. I don't know if charter changes. I looked at Carol, if that has the same crossover deadline or not. I never can tell which has the sort of the special sauce on it or something and it gets exempted, but that one's the last one. So we are almost through all 4 items.
And Bob isn't here, but he presented the 2 Burlington charter changes on the floor, the bulk of them.
Okay, anything else, Carol or Emma? If not, we will go to city council. We can use the time. We have you guys from now 7:17 to 7:30. If you want to each give a 2-minute update, and you can start with Sarah if you'd like.
Sure. As always, there's a lot been going on. One of the things that we dealt with a few weeks ago and is a pressing issue in the city is use of the ARPA money to stand up several different programs for the houseless. So we've proposed developing a low barrier emergency shelter pod program, and these would be purchase of tiny, and I'm just going to call them pods or rooms, to put in a yet undecided place and provide support services for some truly emergency shelter. So that's on its way, and hopefully we'll be hearing more about that in the next month or so. Along with that, we're going to stand up another low barrier community resource center. It's sometimes called the day station, but it's a place that people can go during the day to get support services, be guided through programs, and all of that. So, and that's been a really big need. We opened one several months ago in the VFW on South Winooski Avenue, but at some point later this year, that building and that site's going to start to move for redevelopment. So that was only a temporary location. In addition, we've agreed to fund a special assistant to end homelessness. And that really is to add capacity to the CEDO office to very specifically deal with houseless issues. And then as part of that, we're also going to provide some funding to CVOEO for the coordinated entry program, which is really the hands-on where we have a team of professionals trying to deal one-on-one with different houseless families. So that's kind of my update on that. We had quite a discussion on short-term rentals last night, and but I don't have time to go in it, so maybe one of the other counselors can fill you in on that.
Sure, I'll go and I'll continue on Sarah's intro to the short-term rental conversation. Actually, we passed ordinance last night that will restrict and regulate the use of residences as short-term rentals in the city. These are the Airbnbs, VRBOs, et cetera. It's something that ordinance committee and the planning staff and others have been working on for about 2 years. And there's no doubt that we need to put some boundaries on what's allowable, because currently a lot of the STRs or short-term rentals STRs were operating without, outside of ordinance. And there's interest in protecting neighborhoods and limiting the impact to housing stock. And it's been challenging balancing those needs with a desire to have STRs as an option and to support those who are providing them. All three of the New North End councilors, along with Councilor Mason, preferred a slightly different approach that was less restrictive than the one that was ultimately passed. And it was offered through amendment by Councilor Carpenter, but another version was passed. And so if you have questions on that, we can answer that. Also, last night, we chose not to renew the mask mandate. So it will expire on March 3rd. With the worst of Omicron surge behind us, as evidenced by the falling positivity rates and falling hospitalizations, we're choosing not to renew. Businesses and institutions can still choose to require masks or proof of vaccination status, but the city is not going to mandate it anymore. Another thing I'll mention briefly is I sit on the TUC, and I'm on a committee that was charged with reviewing a parking management plan for North Mooski Avenue. We chose last week to continue work looking for additional off-street parking options before we approved the parking management plan. So I guess my time's up. But if you have questions about that, I'm happy to answer.
Ali, would you like to give a 2-minute update? Welcome. You're muted.
I'm going to pass. I'll allow Mark Ballo to continue for my 3 minutes.
Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, I'll just finish up my thank you, Ali. I'll just finish up my update on North Mooski Avenue. So there were a number of stakeholders, including Community Health Center and some of the businesses and residents along the northern part of the corridor from Riverside Avenue to Union Street. They were concerned about the loss of 40 parking spaces. So we're going to continue conversations with off-street parking, looking for off-street parking options to make up for those 40 spaces. And the last thing I'll say is, it's a reminder you probably heard from a number of people already, but it's worth repeating. It's too late to mail your ballot. So if you still need to vote, you got to return it in a Dropbox or vote it on town meeting day. And I'll end there.
All right, we'll open it up to questions. Any questions for the city councilors? I see TJ's hand up first. TJ, go ahead.
Thank you. Really quickly, where are the drop boxes? I've been in California, now I'm in Connecticut, and I'll be home, hopefully, fingers crossed, tomorrow. And I need to know where to drop off my ballot.
The Miller Center has one, and then Avenue 1 down.
Any other questions for city councilors?
Yes, I do.
Okay, Dale. Going forward, folks, if you could use the raise hand function, that would be helpful.
I tried, but the computer reached out and hit me in the face, and I had to go to a different route. My comment concerns last night's city council meeting, seeing that we were discussing at this point in time with the 3 city councilors. I was totally disgusted in the performance of our city council president last night when he basically went on a diatribe of 10 to 15 minutes, uncontrolled, and basically called the mayor of our city a racist. I was disappointed that none of our counselors within the city interrupted with a point of order and asked the council president to turn over the gavel at that time, because there was no excuse for the city council president to be going off on a rampage while he was the acting city council president. Maybe the city councilors tried and they were rebuffed by the council president. I don't know. But I was very disappointed in the entire city council for letting the city council president going off on that tirade. I thought it was totally disgusting. And
Dale, do you have a
absolute
question for the city
miscarriage.
councilors?
Yes, I'm asking it. Did they try to raise a point of order and stop the acting city council president from going out on a limb and just going off and off
Okay.
and off?
Thank you for your question.
If you look at the city council agenda, there are points in the agenda when city councilors are either general council business or president's business, where they are allowed and invited to offer remarks. And it was during that period of time.
Should the city council president turn over the gavel at that time?
I believe it was at the time he is allowed to give remarks to the council.
I mean, in addition to what Councilor Carpenter said, basically, the city council president can talk in regards to general city affairs, and that's what he was doing. So I don't know why you see that as a problem, sir.
Because he was making racist, he was accusing the mayor of Burlington of
Thank
being
you for
a
your
racist.
question. I think like he has the power to say whatever he wants as general city affairs, or sometimes as a president of the city council.
So he can accuse anybody of being a racist as a city council
I'm not
president.
talking about accusation, but we're just talking about the processes in which the government should work.
I'm
He has
talking
the
about
power
the
to talk about
accusations.
whatever he
Ali.
wants.
I'm
Thank you,
talking
sir.
about the accusations, Ali.
Thank you, sir.
We are going to move on. We
Talking
have
about the
our,
accusations, Ali.
we're moving
Thank
on
you for your
to,
time.
thank you. We're moving on to the next presentation, was scheduled to start at 7:30. We have members of our school board here. Martine, I think you were leading us off, and did you get capability, Martine, to present? I will ask Sam from CEDO. He was going to give it to the three of you. Sam, were you able to do that?
Yep, they're all set.
All right.
Okay, great.
And we have Tom Flanagan. I see Claire Will here as well. So
Yeah, thank you so much. I think Superintendent Flanagan is going to start us off, and I will ask him which document he would like me to share first. We have the budget one pager as well as the budget development presentation. And you're muted, Tom.
Thank you, Martine. I was thinking that I could walk through the presentation. And,
Okay.
Yeah, well, so starting there would be great.
I will share that. Oops. Can everybody see it?
yes.
Great.
All right. Great, thank you. So thanks for having us tonight. This is the presentation that our Executive Director of Operations and Finance and myself did for the school board back in January. Since then, we've done a couple of additional presentations, one at Town Meeting Day TV, and we also have updated our literature on our webpage. So we have a line item budget, a annual report, the fiscal year 21 report that prepares us for the fiscal year 23 budget, and the budget one pager. So those are all online at bsdvt.org for you to take a look. So this is an older slide that includes next steps. Those next steps were taken by the board on 1/17 to approve the ballot language that we have put forward and that's currently on ballots. So I thought tonight we'd talk through with you all and just have opportunity for questions and conversation too. I know there are questions and about this, so we're happy to take any questions that you may have. So if we go to the next slide, Martine.
Yeah, I was going to tell you to go ahead and just let me know when to move on, and I will attempt to do that. There we go.
Sure. Yeah, so I'm going to move through some of these slides relatively quickly. These are slides that have we've again put out there before, but this shows the education spending increase over fiscal years from fiscal year 2021, 22 over the past 3 years. So that just shows some historical context of education spending increase. Next slide. So when we were building the budget, one of the primary thing that we were concerned with was being disciplined and not making any significant additions to the budget outside of wages, benefits, and other sort of annual costs to run the district. We did not include any major new initiatives in this budget that were adds to the budget that we are bringing forth to taxpayers, except for wages, benefits, and sort of these other anticipated costs. We included in that is the downtown BHS. So we do have an ongoing cost for downtown BHS that we think it's important for everybody to understand. And in addition to downtown, in addition to the funds that we have, or that we have additional funds that have come through to us over 3 installments from the American Rescue Plan, and we call those the ESSER funds or the recovery funds, because we have to submit a recovery plan to the Agency of Education. So that, or to the Agency of Education, who has approved our plan, and that allows us to do significant work around mental health, social and emotional well-being, and academic achievement. And it's as a result of the pandemic and the impacts the pandemic have had on the district. So the big takeaway is this $2.5 million budget growth, plus the downtown BHS, the cost of downtown BHS. And that's so I said that was included. I'm sorry, that's not included. So overall, it's a $3.3 million add to the growth of the budget this year, the proposed budget in fiscal year 23 versus fiscal year 22. But we do have these ESSER funds that we're able to utilize to address the impact of the pandemic. So the next slide. Oh, the other thing to note on that slide is that we've run a surplus for the past 7 years. So you'll see the surplus come up. The district had a deficit problem historically, and thankfully that has been cleared up, and we've been able to maintain. We've had strong fiscal management over the past 7 years and have been able to maintain a surplus over the past 7 years. So one of the things that we did this year was to create an equitable budgeting formula. So we knew that there were inequities in the budget, and that number one, we needed to get a better handle on where our staff was, what schools they were at, and get better, position control. So that's part of what we've done here, and also make sure the funds are flowing to schools, to the types of activities that schools believe are important. So we developed a process, an equitable budgeting process by which we allocated funds. These are a part of these are not new adds to the budget. They are just a part of the existing budget, but we've given schools the opportunity to make decisions about what works best for their school with a certain amount of funding, based on a formula, an equity formula that is actually the recommended state equity formula that I'll speak about a little bit later. So schools met with their school improvement teams or their school advisory groups. Those school advisory groups made some decisions about how to utilize funds specifically to support their schools. And so what they were able to do is to reorganize some of their investments, and we were able to reorganize some of our investments across the district to invest in things that will directly impact schools. You see interventionists show up throughout elementary and middle. We had schools tell us they wanted an additional special educator, tutoring services, academic paraeducators, classroom libraries, and you can see more of the other types of investments that schools have decided that they would like to make on top of the base allocation that we made. But just a reminder, again, this is not with new funds. These are with funds that that we've been able to utilize in a more targeted way to allow schools to make decisions about what best meets the needs of their students. The next slide. So we'll keep going. This describes how tax rates are derived, which is a combination of education spending, equalized pupils, the dollar yield, and the common level of appraisal.
Yeah, and I just want to add before I move on to the next slide, if folks want a little bit of a deeper dive in how this funding formula works, I highly recommend you go to the Vermont School Board Association website under resources. There is about a 15-minute video on how all of this works.
Thank you, Martine. Okay, so these are the tax variable estimates. So you see the estimates that we've made to indicate the tax variables. The big takeaway here is the equalized pupil count. So one of the things that you'll see in the ballot language is that the equalized pupil is 13.13% in our budget, and yet even with that, because of the health of the ed fund, the estimated tax rates are projected to go down, and we can talk more about that. I know there are a lot of questions about that. But the equalized pupil count is important for everyone to recognize, because this looks at the number of students that we have and how they are weighted, derives the fund there. And we have seen a decrease in the number of students. So districts across the country saw a decrease in their enrollments. Due to the pandemic, we've actually seen a decrease in enrollment over 3 years. So that's something that we really need to attend to, and that's playing into the equalized pupil count and why that number is high. And it's something that we really need to we do really need to attend to, and I want to make sure that people know about the work that the school board has done to advocate for an equitable funding formula. So one of the things that we know, based on a report that the Agency of Education commissioned and the University of Vermont, Rutgers, and the American Institutes of Research produced a report that highlighted how the funding formula in the state of Vermont is inequitable, and it's disproportionately impacting Burlington and Winooski and other districts that have, although we have the highest number of students who are English learners, other districts that have students who are English learners and also have high numbers of students who are living in poverty and who have special education needs. That actually, I think, just moved out of Senate Ed last week. Martine and Kendra, maybe, I don't know if you all want to give more of an update on that, but we have to fix the funding formula, or we'll continue to see our equalized pupil number be much higher than it should be, because we have this inequitable funding formula that everyone acknowledges is inequitable. So there are really the two big things going on here are the equalized pupil count, the number, our enrollment has been going down. And number two, we are because of the inequitable funding model for the state, we're paying too much for individual students. Martine, Kendra, do you want to talk a little bit about that and where that is, or is this not the right time?
I mean, I'm happy to talk about that. We have been working really hard, and we've been keeping the NPA up to date kind of on our progress, because it is such an important, topic for Burlington and Winooski and other school districts with large ELL populations. So we are really happy that it looks like the legislature is moving in the direction of adopting updated weights that was presented in that 2019 per pupil weighting formula study that we've been talking about. And Senate Education just voted to move along a memo that said that they're going to change the ELL weight to what Tammy Colby, UVM Rutgers, have said that it costs to educate a ELL student, which is about $25,000 per student. So it's a really exciting time, and we're hoping that soon the bill will come to crossover, and it has to go to the House. So we have some work to do with the House, but the Senate is looking really good. And we're hoping that the House will follow in the footsteps of what the Senate is also proposing. So be on the lookout for that, because that will change the equalized pupil component. So there's those four tax components that Tom just talked about: education spending, equalized pupil, the dollar yield, and the common level of appraisal. So our equalized pupils, because they went down, right, it negatively affects our tax rate. So we're really hoping that in the future that will be bumped up, and it will help all of us. I think that's enough.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thanks, Kendra. So these are other variables that play into the overall funding. Those include the audited fund balance, the current levels of appraisal, and state revenue. We have an extremely complicated funding system here in Vermont. And so one of the things that we've really been trying to do is work to explain it in a way that it can be understood, and really the impact can be understood. So that's what we're trying to do, and we appreciate the opportunity like this to be able to talk about it and have people ask questions. All right, so let's go to the next slide. So here are the estimated tax implications. So I think we may have, Martine, I sent you a more updated version of this that we've used for town meeting day. I wonder if you have that one, because I'd like to show that slide here. Or actually it looks like I can share my. Why don't I share my screen? Is that working? Can everybody see that?
Yes, Tom, thank you for, yes, thank you.
Okay. So this is the presentation that we did on February 10th. So the numbers can, as we learn more, we continue to update our information. But this information, again, is all reflected in our webpage, on our webpage, in the annual report, in the line item budget, and in the one pager. And those three things are all connected. So the estimated tax implications that oops, sorry, I'm moving things around, that you can see here are, sorry, I have to kind of move my screen around. So here we explain the impact on the on property taxes. But I'm actually going to go one above. Sorry, I'm fumbling around here a little bit. Why is spending? So I mentioned earlier, spending per equalized pupil is increasing by over 13%. And that is because of the overall spending increasing by 3.3% or 3.1 million, which I mentioned earlier in that previous presentation. The non-tax revenue to pay for spending is decreasing. We used surplus last year to offset the impact on taxpayers, of the budget on taxpayers. We used less surplus this year. And then the number of equalized pupils, as I mentioned earlier, decreased by nearly 200 over the past 3 years. So you can see the breakdown of how these three items play to that 13%. So about 4% in the increase, in the budget increase, about 3% in the using less of the surplus, and about 6% for the equalized pupil decrease. So even with the equalized pupil at 13%, because of the health of the ed fund, we are anticipating that taxpayers could see a reduction of 6.89% on property taxes. Now, this assumes that there's a surplus of $90 million in the education fund currently. And so this 6.89% assumes current law. So we felt like we really needed to lean on the number that we knew was in current law. And that is the $90 million, which is a surplus. We've heard speculation from multiple different places that the $90 million could be used in different places, but that's all speculation at this point. And we would need change of law to do that. So all we know now, based on current law, is that property taxes could decrease for a hypothetical property taxpayer 6.89%. So we are anticipating, because of the health of the ed fund, even if this whole 90 million does not go back to taxpayers, which again, current law says it will, that we would see a decrease in for property tax rates for taxpayers. So I'm going to keep moving. I mentioned the equitable budgeting model before, so I won't go back into that, but and that led to that RISE allocation that I mentioned earlier, and the RISE themes that I mentioned earlier. We do have a surplus, so I mentioned the surplus, and we're assuming an audited FY21 fund balance of approximately $3.6 million. And we're going to allocate that in these three ways: 1.5 million going to the FY23 budget to keep, honestly, to keep tax rates down and to keep to be conscious of that. And it goes to the budget to cover the things in the budget that we will need without having to make an additional ask. 600,000 to enhancing downtown BHS. We knew going into downtown BHS that we would need to experience school there and make some improvements. We've already made some improvements to downtown BHS. We've we've put up walls to the ceiling in some classrooms. We've added some doors. We know we need more there. So this allows us to do that. And then 1.5 million to the new BHS BTC project to reduce the need to borrow for this project. So the other big assumption or the big kind of guiding principle in the budget was to be mindful of the fact that we are planning to ask voters to support a bond to build a new high school in November of 2022. And so we've been looking for ways to raise money, both internally and externally. And we're going to continue to do that work. But part of what we wanted to do here with the surplus is put some of the surplus funds toward that project. And so with this, and we've been able to set aside $10 million from the American Rescue Plan funding, we now have $11.5 million that we're able to put toward that new high school. So here's the question. I imagine many of you have seen it. Oops. And so the question is, shall the voters of the school district approve the school board to spend 98 million and some, which is the amount the school board has determined to be necessary to ensure for the ensuing fiscal year. It is estimated that this proposed budget, if approved, will result in education spending of $19,000 per pupil. Again, this is a big one that we have to continue to figure out over the next couple of years. And I think the biggest way that we will make a dent in this is through an updated funding formula that fairly funds Burlington schools. And because right now we are not fairly funded. And you can see that in the way that our neighbors are funded versus how we are. And this projected spending, which I already kind of explained the why, per equalized pupil is 13.13 higher than the current year. We added this language that spending at this level could produce a property tax rate decrease of 6.98%. That's a current estimate based on a $90 million surplus. And again, based on the law that surplus goes back to districts. We do note in all of our materials and in all of our presentations that could change depending on what the legislature decides to do. And so, but right now we don't know what that would be, and anything we said would be speculation. And this is what we know at this point. So with that, I think I'll open it up.
Okay, we'll use the raise hand function to ask questions. All right, I see a couple. I see Deb Booten first. Deb, if you could unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, hi, thank you for that, Tom. I'm concerned that, there's still the big disconnect that people don't understand how an increase is going to lower their taxes. So I guess I'm not optimistic that this is going to pass. But beyond that, the thing that I'm confused, I'm always confused about some of this, but in your calculations, you refer to the homestead rate and the amount that's going to come from homestead taxes. Why aren't non-homestead taxes figured into that? And this is just a question I've been trying to find out more about lately, because the rates are so similar that yeah. Anyway, I don't, you're just only bringing in the homestead rates into this, right?
We are, well, first, yeah, we are bringing in, when we look at the key kind of tax variables, we are thinking about, or we're utilizing education spending, equalized pupil count, the homestead dollar yield, and the common level of appraisal. And those are the tax variables.
Right, but we also have taxes. More and more people have been buying up homes and they're paying the non-homestead tax rate, right? Anyway, that's where I get very confused by this. And Martine, you're gonna answer, right? Or explain.
Well, I was just gonna throw out there that this isn't a decision that Burlington makes. This is a formula that's set by the state.
Yeah.
So, we don't have a lot of freedoms in how we make these calculations.
Yeah. Okay, I see. Thanks.
Right. This is state statute, the way the calculations are determined.
Yeah.
And I will say to your first question, I know that's on people's minds, and I want everyone to know, and people to know here, we have used that last clause multiple times in the past 7 or 8 years. We used it in 2017. And so the idea is because it's so complicated, we want people to understand what the impact, or what we are projecting the impact on taxes to be, but have people also understand that is a projection. And so we're trying to do our best to do that here. And we use language that we used in 2017 on a ballot to do a similar thing.
Okay, Jeff Comstock.
Yes, thank you. You mentioned that your equalized pupil count went down by 200.
Yes.
And I'm curious whether that is a loss of 200 of students who were in the equalized pupil count, or have some of those pupils, students, migrated up and out of the eligibility category. So I'm trying to grasp on, where, given that an equalized pupil count of 200, it really means some number less than 200 of actual students. And did they leave the district, or did they lose eligibility? And kind of the follow-up thought there is, in terms of trying to, it seems like a losing struggle to try to make up funding for the budget through equalized students by raising the the ratio at which they're funded in order to make up our funding shortfall. That, I don't know, that seems like a losing treadmill proposition to me, but thank you.
Yeah, so it is 200 students, so 200 fewer students in the schools, but that's not year over year, that's over a 3-year period of time, because they've pulled the equalized pupil over 3 years and give us that number. And one of the things that we are doing with our equitable budgeting model, which I kind of alluded to a little bit earlier in the presentation, is aligning staffing to funding at the school level, right? We can't continue to staff at the same level if we don't have the same number of students. And so the equitable funding model shows us that we need to look more deeply at our secondary schools. And so, but I didn't think it was wise to cut positions while we have implemented a new budget model, and we need to learn about the impact of that budget model. And so we are going to do a study of the secondary schools and staffing, and look at and so we'll have a report with recommendations on staffing. What we've seen for enrollment over the past number of years is some decline in elementary school. We had a bubble in 8th grade, but we saw a decline in elementary. The middles were robust, and then high school, we lost some students when we moved to downtown BHS, and so that's something that we need to be really mindful of. It's not the 200 is spread across all grades, right? But we need to be really mindful of our high school, right? And what kind of high school we will be able to offer our students so that people stay and keep their kids in the schools. And then the third variable is COVID. I mean, we've been in COVID almost 2 years now, or we've been operationalizing school during COVID for the past couple of years. And we know that people have left the schools for here and across the state and country because of COVID. So I think it's a number of different factors, and there's not one way out, right? But if we have an unfair funding formula, we can't get out. We have to have a fair funding formula, and we know we don't have it. That's fact. Everyone will. I haven't found anyone who has disagreed that the funding formula is unfair.
All right, I guess I just want to end by saying that I think I like the concept of internal restructuring and redirection of budget dollars at each grade level kind of thing. I think that's a good concept. Sort of beyond that, I have to admit I get quite lost. Thank you.
Yeah, it's understood. And Jeff, I'm happy to talk if my Nathan Lavery is our Executive Director of Finance and Operations. He's happy to talk. He understands the every nuance of the budgeting very well. And so between the two of us, we're happy to talk more if you want to, ask more questions about it. I think it's better for people to know.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we have time for some more questions. Matt Hurlbert.
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks, Tom. Because this year is not a good year to understand percentages, because it's a new tax bill, because taxes were reassessed, it was supposed to have been fair, but a lot of people have been grossly increased and a lot of people have gone down. It's just complicated. So when you say that the per pupil tax rate has increased in this proposed budget by 13% this year, because we can't really compare, in my mind, so statistically, what has that per pupil increase looked like over the last 2, 3, 4 years? Are we consistent? Is it always about a 13%? 13% just sounds really high to me, but I don't know what the past years have been.
No, 13% is high, and that is a combination of factors that you mentioned them, and that is the equalized pupil, right? That's not the tax rate. The tax rate, the property tax rate is something different.
So is it higher per pupil because there's less pupils?
That is why the spending per equalized pupil is 13%. That's one of the 3 reasons. So it's the overall spending, it's the surplus. So we've been able to utilize surplus, and then it's the 3.1% increase that we are proposing, 3.3% increase that we are proposing for the budget.
Okay, so that's really what needs to be focused on, is the 3.3%.
Right.
And I think in past years it's been pretty equal, wasn't it 2.9 last year or something?
Yeah.
Okay.
It usually, yeah.
That's the number to focus on. The 13.13 is, with 200 less students, the math makes the per go up. So that.
Yeah, and I think the tax, the estimated tax impact is also, something that I think people should understand, and so we've tried to articulate that here, and that is because of the ed fund.
Can I just add, Matt, to your point and question? I do think this year is an aberration. I don't foresee that we will continue to have this kind of increase year after year. And Kendra and I, as the co-chairs of facilities and finance, this is something that we're going to really be focusing on. And as I said a few weeks ago when I spoke, as citizens of Burlington, we're going to have some options, right? If this continues to be an issue, we have some schools that aren't full at the moment. So that might be something that we look at in the future. The city of Burlington has not had an appetite for closing a school in the past, but that might be something that we have to discuss in the future. Are we able to bring some students back to the district? If not, what can we look at in terms of making some cost savings in the future? I would also, I just want to say, since I'm speaking now, we all also have the opportunity to speak to our legislators and our governor about what he's going to do with that education fund. It's important that they hear from us. That money is there, and if we want it to stay there, then we need to speak up. And a lot of you have already spoken up about the weights, which has been super helpful. Thanks.
Thanks, Martin.
We have about 6 minutes left. And so if we could go rapid fire with questions. Bob Duncan, you have your hand up, and then I'll go up to David Kirk. But Bob, for some reason, you're not at the top of the screen, but could you ask your question?
Sure, thank you. Tom, you said that you didn't want to speculate on the property tax money that would come back from the state, but you're assuming that it would be refunded as per the law, which would be the full 90 million. Do you know offhand what Burlington's share of that 90 million would be? And so if we were to hear on the radio, for instance, that only half of that was going to be remain in the education fund, that we would know that therefore there's a certain percentage that Burlington would get, and how that would impact this speculated 6.98% decrease?
Yeah, Bob, thank you for that question. Unfortunately, I don't have that. I don't have a whole number for a decrease. If we were to see the ed fund, part of the ed fund go to a different direction, I don't have the number, because I'd be speculating on what that number could be. I have no idea what that number could be.
Right, but Burlington must be getting some $1 million, some many millions out of the 90 million as the largest school district in the state. So if the ed fund goes down to 30 million instead of 90 million, wouldn't we get a third of what we would normally get?
Yes.
Is that,
yes.
So I guess that's what I'm trying to understand. If you were to tell me that Burlington out of the 90 million would be getting, you're expecting 90, which would result in whatever we get would result in 6.98% decrease. If Burlington got half of what we're supposed to get, that decrease would be some smaller number, not half, because it doesn't go in that same way. But if we're 20 million of the 90 million that comes to Burlington, and then the state says we're only going to give 30, then we know we're going to get a third of 20 million, then our tax rate is going to be substantially less, or the decrease is going to be substantially less. It would seem to me that you would know what Burlington's share of that 90 million is.
Yeah, I don't have that on my fingertips, but I can try to pull it as we're getting questions.
Okay, thank you.
I will say, Bob, some of the things that we've heard from the governor and others is the desire to invest in workforce development, in CTE, and in even we've heard a little bit that there may be some talk about using the ed fund to support the change in the per pupil in the funding formula. Again, those are just things we're hearing at this point from different people, and the legislature would need to act. But in each of those cases, the district would stand to benefit from those decisions. So I think there are multiple there are multiple different ways that could play out, I guess.
Okay, next question, David Kirk.
So it's costing us about $20,000 per equalized student per year, per what it says on the ballot. And realistically, it's almost $28,000 per student to educate them in Burlington with this 13% increase, using your math, using your numbers off the ballot, and the amount of students that Burlington has. So if it costs us $28 million per student, and we're losing students, you said we lost 200 students in the last 2 years. I figured it closer to 250. But either way, and you have chosen not to make any decreases in the school with 200 less students in it. It seems a little like we're just padding ourselves and paying for things that maybe we need to look at decreases, especially with a 200 student, 200 less students in the district. I mean, Essex has got more students than we currently do in their student body, and they're doing it for thousands of dollars less per equalized student. And I'm just using the numbers from Burlington's website and Essex's website to get this information. I'm not, you know, I'm not a scholar, but I'm just using the information that people are given, and I'm trying to make sense out of why Burlington sees the need for a $13 million increase. I understand we spent, you know, we're showing a surplus every year, so it seems kind of painful to come up with a 13% increase when we're showing windfalls. You had a $3.5 million surplus, you said. So as a taxpayer paying my taxes, I understand that there's a chance we're going to get some decrease from the state, but there's no guarantee that. And you know that as well as I do, that you're not even going to know that number for months. So it's very hard for the taxpayer to make a educated assessment on 13.5% increase.
Right, David, thank you for that question. I think the one thing to clarify is that the budget is 3.1% more. The proposed budget for fiscal year 23 is 3.1% more than last year. Yeah. And the overall budget is $98 million. And so I think we were at 95 million last year. And it's 19,000 per equalized pupil. So that's what we're paying per equalized pupil. And that is a number. And I'm glad you brought up Essex, because Essex, I love Essex. I had no problem with Essex. They are benefiting from the funding formula that is unfair. There are a couple of districts that all the studies that are telling us that the funding formula is unfair. That's one of the districts, right? So that is why, that is one reason. It's not why, it's not the only reason. And we do have work to do, David. We do have to think about the way that we're staffed and ensure that the way that we're staffed is efficient, and what's best for kids. The challenge with 200 students, we have 13 school programs. We have 9 schools. So we're pretty small. I'm from districts that are a lot bigger in terms of numbers, but we have a lot of schools. We have 9 schools. That's a lot of schools for the number of students we have. So, you know, we do have some serious work to do to think about how we're allocating our resources, and that work needs to happen, needs to be really carefully thought through and implemented. And I would say we're in that first phase, this equitable budgeting model, understanding where all the staff are. We developed ratios at each school. So we didn't have these before. What are the ratios that all elementary schools should have student to teacher, right? Middle school student to teacher. We had no ratios. So we're trying to really understand our current budget, and where there are places where we can think differently about it. So I think it's two things. I think you're right that we need to look hard. And I think we need to do that over time. And we're fortunate this year that we have an ed fund that is healthy. We didn't think we were going to have a healthy ed fund 2 years ago. We thought that it would be catastrophic, and it's not. And that's, I think, you know, good leadership around the finances in the state. So we do have that ability to keep property tax rates low this year through the ed fund, and we know ed fund dollars are going to come to districts. Last year it was 74 million. So we're going to keep that. So we're going to, you know, the ed fund's going to keep some of that ed fund surplus is going to come to us. We know that for sure. And we believe that is going to decrease the property tax rate on education for taxpayers, truly. And we know
I'm going to have to call it here. We're about 3 minutes over into the next presenter. So I really appreciate this good discussion. Any follow-up? If folks had questions, should they go to?
Jeff, can I make one last, just real quick remark, which is just
Sure,
something that Kendra and I talked about. You know, just a reluctance in COVID to make any major changes. We are in a pandemic. We've sort of been holding steady. David, I hear what you're saying 100%. There's also a teacher shortage. There are droves of educators who are leaving. And so when we do make, if and when we do make adjustments to our staffing, it needs to be thoughtful, and it needs to be something that we've really given, you know, some time and thought to. I just wanted to throw that out there. And I'm happy to speak to people about an overweighted district versus an underweighted district, because I've lived in both worlds. So Kendra.
Yes, as am I. And I do feel like in COVID, we do need to be careful. Like there were a lot of families who chose to homeschool that will go back. And so we cannot cut staffing until we actually come out of the pandemic and get to a baseline normal. And federal immigration policy has also played a role in our decreased numbers. So we want to see what a normal year looks like, but we are up to looking and doing the hard work, as Tom and Martine has said, and we are happy to talk to anybody offline. We've been living and breathing this for a while, and the funding formula is super complicated. And so, a lot of factors go into it, and the equalized pupil affects your tax rates in a way that is so significant that that's why we keep bringing it to you. So in addition to our own budget, but the common level appraisal also affects your budget and the education spending. So there's things that are outside of our control as well. And those 4 things, really only one of those things are in our control. So that's important to know with education funding. Thank you.
All right, thanks you guys. We are going to move on to our next ballot item topic, the Great Streets Main Street concept design and presentation. This evening we have Olivia and Laura presenting, and I believe Brian is here as well if there's questions that go over to your expertise.
Yep, so I'm going to start sharing my screen, and I'll try to get through this quickly and see if we can leave as much time as possible. Are you guys all seeing a presentation?
Yes.
Up? Great. So yeah, we're here to primarily talk about Main Street's concept and as a revitalization project, but we'll also touch a little on the ravine sewer, which is inside of ballot item 4, as well as the ballot numbers themselves. So going through the background, why are we here? Main Street's really not so great right now. There's a lot of deterioration of surfaces and infrastructure, green belts that are struggling, ADA and accessibility challenges throughout the corridor, as well as really old infrastructure under the ground. There is a large water main that serves the reservoir that is 130 years old that goes up Main Street. And so regardless of what we do on ballot item number 4, that's under the ground and that'll eventually have to get replaced. So the city started our effort on Great Streets back in 2016 after our first TIF ballot vote. Under that effort, we looked at a concept plan that included St. Paul Street, City Hall Park, as well as the 6 blocks of Main Street that we're here to talk about today. We did this in as 3 large projects so that we could have a cohesive feel and also work on developing something called our downtown streetscape standards. And so this document that came in front of the City Council in 2018 helps us inform what we're going to do with our streets inside of this downtown block. This gives us materials, layouts of streets for transportation, different purposes. It's not to create a uniform look, but more of a unified look, so that generally as you arrive in the downtown of Burlington, streets can relate to each other, but also have a unique personality or feeling. Our team that we've hired to help us with this effort of Great Streets is looking at the street in 3 primary components. They're functional, the community-led portions, as well as the unique and beautiful items within the street. So thinking about the functional components, who and how are we going to be using this street? We want to make sure that all modes of transportation are accommodated: pedestrians, cyclists, vehicles, transit riders, as well as the adjacent business owners that have storefronts servicing off Main Street. This means making sure that there are safe connections at our intersections as well as potentially mid-block, creating spaces for people to pause, rest, or just gather within the street. Also remembering that it needs to be functional. It's still going to need to serve transit on the street. We still need to be able to have people of all abilities moving around, as well as managing our stormwater that comes down Main Street. It's a steeper street. It has a lot of impervious surface that it feeds, and so this is going to be an important component of the project. Also remembering that throughout this entire process, we're supporting the businesses along Main Street that need to work through the construction, but Main Street's our gateway to our entire downtown and our waterfront. And so this project has a community-wide impact, which is why we are targeting such a large audience with our outreach. This rendering was done during the original effort, so it's just kind of a talking piece, but it really outlines some of the goals that are within the standards that are wider dedicated pedestrian spaces, tree belts that can be hardscaped, but they still serve a green function. And so they are pervious pavers, there's tree infrastructure underneath the ground, but it allows activation and different use on top of it. For Main Street specifically, our bike walk plan calls for dedicated pedestrian or bicycle facilities. In this rendering, it's bicycle lanes in each direction up at the grade of a pedestrian. Downtown street standards have parking on both sides of the street. They look to add on-street rain garden features, and then obviously the accommodation of vehicle travel. So as we break down that picture into kind of the three groupings, the functional elements of the street, this image starts to hint at one of the really important pieces that's a little understated in our efforts to date, but it's the underground utilities. It speaks to our water and our sewer that are underneath the ground, as well as adding in a dedicated stormwater piping system so that at the bottom of Main Street at Battery, when the city's ready, we can capture water that will have already been separated along Main Street. Like a lot of our Old North End and New North End had already had a sewer separation project. Main Street will already be separated and it's pretty close to the lake. So we have a few ideas, but nothing I can elaborate on, but a couple ideas about how to take that water off Main Street and put it into an outfall that goes out to the lake. Other things that we are looking for and really looking for feedback as we shape our concept is about the community-led spaces, how the space is going to interact with the roadway and the adjacent businesses, as well as kind of the features and the feelings that come with the streetscape. So what we've done to date, we've heard some feedback, concerns that this is the first that you've heard of this project since 2016. It's a little bit by design. We've been working on other projects. Main Street is starting now. There's going to be a few months of community input until our designers kind of take that and turn it around and then push it back out and say, this is what we've heard from you and this is how it fits on Main Street. That effort of taking in feedback will continue until late April, where we will then meet again with various community meetings and leadership meetings, structured meetings, and bring back those concepts for consideration. And then ultimately, continue through design with all the outreach and more targeted feedback, and then finally ending in construction. And we'll get to the schedule a little bit later. One of the things we want to make sure is we hear all of our voices in our community, and we realize that some of our structured meetings don't necessarily get the full range of community members that we have. So we've targeted some focus groups. We've met with some youth of our community, 11th and 12th graders. My gosh, those guys have had more brilliant ideas than I think I've heard the entire Great Streets process. So it was really inspiring to meet with them. We've met with the businesses along Main Street, as well as a lot of the downtown over the last 5 weeks. Immigrant and refugees are scheduled for mid-March, as well as a mobility focused group in middle of March. And we're still working on the scheduling, but we do have a BIPOC group, focus group that we are working on coordinating. So one of the things you'll see on the Great Streets website is you can find the presentations that were done for the community by our consultant in the beginning of February. There's also poll questions. And so if you want some sort of structured way to give us feedback, there is a sheet in there that you can look at the questions that we asked during that meeting, but some really inspiring ones, like what tomorrow, what do you want Main Street to become? Switching gears a little bit, I'll talk about the ravine sewer. So this is on the ballot item. It wasn't part of the previous bond vote, so we haven't really been able to start on this. So Main Street had a component that was voted on in 2015, which is why we are where we are today and able to continue or have started this early. The ravine sewer won't start until a little bit later. The portion that we are looking to do some work on is the section of this ravine sewer. It's this purple line here. It runs between College Street and Main Street for orientation. This is Memorial Auditorium. This is the fire station. This is the library. And so this sewer cross-cuts this gateway block, as it's referred to, about 20 to 25 feet in the ground. It's 160 years old. I'll show you a picture of the inside of it on the next slide, but you know, it cross-cuts this parking lot. And based on the location, the age, the depth, and the way that it's constructed, it really limits what we can do with this area. And we'll get into why. So why are we talking about the ravine sewer? It is a 6-foot redstone tunnel in this location. It is very uneven on the inside, and the floor actually will step down in various places just based on the way that it's constructed. And so for these top 3, reinforce, repair, and rehabilitate, if we were to allow development to happen on top of this without doing any substantial changes to the ravine sewer, there are concerns about how much reinforcement is going to be needed to put over the top of this to build above it. There's also concerns about how would we ever repair it with a building above it in its current condition. And then the third is in its current shape, construct, size, however it is down there, we can't use our common rehabilitation practices such as relining. That's used inside of a formed structured pipe. So that leads us to why this is on the ballot. These last 2 items here about relocating. There is the option that we looked at that we could potentially relocate the sewer by interrupting it on College Street and bringing it down South Winooski. There is also the possibility of reconstructing in place and creating an actual pipe shape that in the future, if there were concerns or need to maintain it underneath a new building or new whatever happens to be there. But a traditional shape with new materials would go a long ways towards facilitating that. So where are we going with all of this? This is a schedule slide. So over the next few months, we're going to continue to work on refining the concepts and taking in feedback. So please feel free to reach out. You'll get an email address for Olivia at the end of the slide. So be ready to write that down. We'll move into design and permitting next, ultimately with a target to start construction on Main Street in 2023. It's a minimum of 2 years. It's a little bit of a wild card on the east end because as we talk about the ravine sewer, we're really not starting that work until after the bond vote, until after the funding is approved to be spent on that project, which then puts it a little bit behind Main Street's development and ultimately depending on what is decided for the work type at that end of the project, digging and replacing and putting in a new probably 5-foot to 6-foot diameter sewer in that corridor will be likely create a little bit more than a 2-year work plan there. We do want to highlight, and we've heard it a lot already, about how are we going to keep people engaged in this project, both taking in feedback and providing out information. We have a consultant that is scheduled to help us through all phases of this project. And so we're really working on improving that effort, knowing how much Main Street is to the community. To do a quick highlight of ballot item number 4 and how it relates to the work that you've just seen and heard me talk about, we're estimating that the Main Street project and ravine sewer is about $30,500,000 worth of work. Of that, we have an existing bond approval from 2015 of about $4.5 million, which buys down and relates to ballot item number 4's request for new debt of $25.92 million. It also has an item called related costs of $1.47 million. And that's really to help with the admin, project management, staff time, audit, consulting. That cost is over the next 14 years, which is the remaining life of the district. Whereas the 25.9 really speaks to the actual Main Street and ravine sewer projects. So where can you get more information or how do you get in touch with us? Olivia's email is odarisse, DARISSE @burlingtonvt.gov. You can also find her email on our Great Streets BTV website. And if you're still looking for more information about the ballot, there is a banner right at the top of the burlingtonbt.gov website, which will lead you to those questions. And so that's where we're at. And I will take this down in just a sec in case people are copying things down.
Great. So also for questions now, Laura?
Yes.
All right, great. TJ, I see your hand up.
Thank you. Thanks much. Thanks for that presentation. My one question, and I think this is a complicated topic. It's hard to understand, but who owns that parking lot? Like, who stands to benefit from that all that work being done? Is that privately owned, or is that owned by the city of Burlington?
The city of Burlington owns the parcel. It's managed by DPW's parking services. But there are other city-owned parcels within that block as well.
Okay. And so if this is done and now all of a sudden that parcel could be used for something else, are there thoughts or plans about how that could generate revenue for the city of Burlington?
That's not DPW's role, so maybe I'll toss that one to Brian.
Sure. The goal here is to make that infrastructure investment that's needed to allow for that process to develop and evolve. But there's no project pending right now for a private entity. But the idea would be that it would be put essentially through a public process to either sell or lease for a development project to take place on that property to generate jobs and commerce and tax revenue.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Laura, for that presentation. It was helpful. What will happen if the vote doesn't pass? And will the project be scaled back? Will the design be altered? Will you do part of it? What will happen?
That's a great question, and one that we've certainly talked about internally. We're coming to you guys in March because it really provides the best opportunity and timeline to go for the bond and funding a little bit later. But there would be an opportunity to act on this again in November. Timing would be terrible with other city initiatives, but it would give us more time to work with the community and find out what scale of a project is appropriate, or just answer questions if that's the area of concern.
Okay, so you would wait until November if to do anything at all? Then
that's the answer that I know of. Really,
Okay.
ultimately, it's the administration's call as to how they would proceed forward.
Okay, thank you.
Matt Hurlbert.
Thank you. Just a few questions, and some of them are selfish. My office is at the bottom of Main Street. So the first thing that pops up is remembering back to St. Paul. It was a pretty extensive period of closed and businesses suffered. So what's the anticipated plan for closure? And then as far as the actual hardscapes, is there a plan for increased parking, which I think would be great, or are you decreasing parking? And I guess those are the big ones. Moving traffic we've closed half the streets down from 3 or 4 lanes to 2 lanes recently. Is there a plan to scale back moving traffic, or is there a plan to move more traffic more efficiently?
Some of the other nearby city projects are the Parkway would make an effort towards trying to keep people more on Main Street versus some of the side streets, and even the Rail Yard Enterprise would do so. Main Street's plan is to still have its 2 lanes, 1 in each direction in its final configuration. And really during construction, especially commute hours, I could still see that being a requirement that we hold our contractor to. And that's where the 2 years of construction is also a little unsure, until our designers get into what the design that our community leads us to. as well as some of the nitty gritties of doing construction and what's necessary underground, it's still an open conversation. As it relates to parking, the proposal to be able to really unlock the potential of Main Street and what it, can be today to serve our community and what it needs to be in the future to help with our climate emergency goals. It does move the parking from being parallel to, or from being diagonal to parallel. So there would be a loss of parking to be able to provide accommodations for the other modes of transportation.
Cars are still the primary mode of transportation. So if you're going to reduce parking, where are you going to increase it to at least stabilize and hopefully increase for the downtown businesses?
There's not a plan to provide any new or increased parking. The project would help direct with new wayfinding to the available existing parking. The existing wayfinding system was only ever allowed to go towards public parking, and so we weren't able to make use of the private parking capacity that exists very nearby. It's also to help the shift in the idea of destination parking, which is pulling up to a parking space and literally just going into a business and then coming right back out, to more of a district parking, which also will help the entire downtown economy by getting people moving around on foot and at a slower pace. I do want to highlight, when we come back in April, we will have more information about the parking loss and kind of changes. But looking at our city's parking trends, the highest parking months are July and August, followed very closely by September and October. And so those are generally fair weather months when the city's parking capacity is much higher than what it needs to be in some of the off seasons. And so, which is when people who are local who are using their cars. So we are looking at kind of that whole balance as it relates to a parking model in this area in the downtown. I love taking in feedback. It helps to, educate and inform all of us as to, especially people who are nearby, who are watching and seeing this.
I just think of a lot of clients and friends that own businesses, restaurants, retail, and it's not easy. And I have so many friends that just don't like to come into town because they feel it's difficult to find parking on a Friday or Saturday night for dinner. And if you're decreasing it, what happens when we're out of COVID and there's a show at the Flynn?
Yep.
And that's a serious question. That's not a joke. That's
nope. I can fully respect that. We've actually had a really productive conversation with the Flynn.
Okay.
And I fall in the same category. I live far enough away that, I would prefer to drive downtown, but I'm going to look for structured parking and know that I can walk a block or two to where I need to go. But
yeah,
people who are not familiar with the downtown, like I might be, don't find it.
No, I agree. And I have my resources, but the average person that comes in occasionally doesn't. So I just really caution the city's decision to remove parking for those businesses. We're having a really hard time maintaining downtown business with the mall closures on Church Street. I would encourage to help them, not squeeze them. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Sarah Carpenter.
Just a quick comment. Deb had asked about what happens if this doesn't fail. And I've asked that question very strongly and really feel that TIF is the right answer. Otherwise, that ravine sewer, the storm water, the pipe that goes all the way down Main Street, we're going to have to fund that another way, which is general capital bonding or increased water and sewer rates. And the TIF is difficult to explain, but it is an opportunity that we've got today to do that. And if we don't choose to do that, we still have an obligation to fund most of what was presented. And that would be the traditional old way of a property tax increase or a water tax increase.
Mm-hmm. So this is a more cost-effective way to do this, Sarah, is what you're saying.
In my opinion, yes.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Okay, next, Bob Pooper. Sorry we missed you earlier, but glad to see you.
I was over on the YouTube feed, decided I should show up here in case somebody had a question. But I want to echo what Matt just said about parking and the general move towards decreasing it. We live in a state with a really old population and mobility is an issue. So that's something that really should be weighed a little more heavily than just the upfront, how many spaces, how many people thing. I've worked at the Flynn for years, and it's amazing the number of people that come there that really have a tough time getting there. All I have to say on it. Thanks.
Yep. No, thank you for that. And this project has the opportunity to help improve accessibility. You know, some of the conversations that we've had with the Flynn are about the access, you know, the spaces that are nearby to that facility, as well as their ability to pair ticket sales with structured parking sales. So these are comments that help lead to other conversations that lead to new strategies. So we appreciate that. There was a comment or a question during the public forum from Bob that talked about the existing parcels in the downtown that are already contributing to TIF. The three big ones are Stratos, the Hilton Garden, and Champlain College are the three existing parcels that really were not in our 2011 tax base that exist now and are providing significant increment for kind of those point sources, as well as the background growth that Sarah spoke to. And that's just the natural property value appreciation, not a tax increase.
Laura, do you see this coming out to the new North End to North Ave? You know, because you showed pictures at the beginning of, you know, the state of Main Street, but I feel like our North Avenue is even in worse shape than Main Street. Will that filter out to this Ward 4 and 7?
I'm not sure that it'll do it in a Great Streets way, but I do know that, you know, the North Ave corridor had significant proposed improvements that we are still working towards. The paving of North Ave is in our bid package, and we get contractor bids next week. So it is something we are very aware of, the condition of, you know, the immediate condition of pavement, and that would be scheduled for being repaired this summer.
Had to ask.
No, it's a good question. But thank you guys all for your time tonight. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation and the questions. We're going to move on to our next topic. We have an update from the Ad Hoc Redistricting Committee. I know that Jeff is here, and we have Robert as well, and any other representatives? I know, Jeff, you invited some other folks.
Yeah.
Can I ask that we maybe give Bob Hooper a minute of his 2 minutes that he would have had earlier today before moving into the ad hoc?
Regarding what, Robert?
Well, he's our state representative along with Carol Odie for District 6-1.
Right.
Let's see what's left at the end, maybe. Although I might have input on this redistricting thing too.
I'm good with that.
Okay, I'm gonna go through this sort of, try to do this fairly quickly. So the ad hoc redistricting committee that the city council put together last fall, the ad hoc committee filed or presented its report to the city council at the last meeting in January, on January 28th, and our January 24th, excuse me. So I think what I would like to do is just go through a short list of some of the priority concepts that the committee recommended to city council to consider when they make their mapping criteria decisions. So the big ones at the top of the list was that folks really wanted multiple representation per ward. So there wasn't necessarily any number assigned to that, and that would kind of depend on how many wards we ended up with, but definitely multiple representation per ward. And that's really coupled with a dislike of the district concept. So going forward, perhaps the district, the north, south, central, et cetera, district concept would go away, and we would go back to potentially two city councilors per ward. The other sort of major concepts is that in an attempt to equalize population among the wards, there's as Robert would tell you, that the target is that the population should be evenly distributed among the wards within a 10% deviation. So equalized population is a goal. Also, a very strong recommendation to maintain neighborhood continuity. Neighborhood characteristics are really important, and to use significant natural boundaries, whether it be physical boundaries or roadway boundaries, in terms of trying to separate existing neighborhoods. And the other major outcome was an acknowledgement that Ward 8 in its current configuration really isn't serving the city very well, because it's it turned out to be a very student-heavy ward, and as a functioning ward, it really hasn't worked very well, because with the 2020 census, it actually had the one of the highest population wards, and yet as a functioning ward, it has the lowest voter turnout of any of the wards in the city. And the NPAs in wards 1 and 8 are actually having a very difficult time functioning, because they're not getting enough full-time resident participation in those organizations. So the goal would be to one of the goals would be to reconfigure that ward and redistribute the student population among some of the neighboring wards. So as far as the city council's role going forward, one of the major objectives the city council is going to have to decide for itself, actually, what's the appropriate size of the council going forward. Are they going to look at going back to a 7-ward map, which has odd consequences, or reconfigure an 8-ward map so that you would either have a 14 or 16 member city council? And in a lot of ways, that's the priority decision for the city council to make, is what is the appropriate working size for themselves, one, in terms of being an effective functioning body, and also how many members do they want to divide the work amongst themselves going forward. So okay, so this, Mark and Sarah might want to chime in on this if they've had some discussions recently. But the other important thing I want folks to know is that originally, under the original resolution, the aim was to have this project completed by town meeting day and put on the ballot for folks to consider. And so it's important to recognize, or that the council has recognized, that this job isn't going to be completed by the current sitting council, and this work will have to continue with the new council. So as far as the schedule for interested people to be aware of is that the city council will have to propose a draft ward map and then boundary definitions, ward boundary definitions sometime in the spring, which will require a fairly robust public hearing process for people to participate in. So that's going to be in the spring, another opportunity for public input and comment and on potential map bound or ward boundary revisions. And then whatever proposed charter change will be revised over the summer and then most likely appear on the November ballot coming forward. So with that, I guess I would like to offer Robert, you or Mark and Sarah, any sort of insights on where the city council is and currently in terms of considering these mapping priorities?
Well, we're behind, which is pretty knowledgeable. So we had a quick conversation today with the city, and the plan is for, we've asked Megan Tuttle to propose, and we've talked to her about a new timeline and schedule. So this would have to be agreed to by the whole council, but the presumption is on the 7th, they will propose something that would likely start up again in April, probably start with a work session with the new council or new members of the council and the current members of the council reviewing what you've just reviewed, but in a work session setting, and then go from there. You know, what we probably need to make an end decision by mid-July. So we would have from mid-April to mid-July to work out all the public hearing and the mapping. The city's mapping specialist has retired. So there is a replacement, but there's some catching up to do. So that's really all I need to report, is that we don't expect to do much in the month of March. It'll restart in April with some sort of work session, at which time the sitting city council will try to make up our minds on those questions you asked. Mark, I don't know if you have more to add.
Yeah, I'll just add that, yes, the council is committed to having this on the November ballot, even though we couldn't meet some of the earlier deadlines. And Director Tuttle has suggested that we would have to have maps ready for council approval by our July 18th or August 15th meetings in order to meet that timeline. And we still think that there's plenty of time, but like Sarah indicated, we need to have, we need to sort of discuss as a council, you know, when we're going to have a work session and start and begin that work. And I do concur with Jeff's assessment that with the first consideration is how big is the council, and you know, once we determine that and determine, you know, whether or not we'll have districts or, you know, whatever, then maps would flow forward from there along with other considerations. But that's where we are. We are behind, we acknowledge it, but we'd rather do it right than do it fast. So we think that the November timeline is achievable. I mean, the November ballot is achievable.
May I add a point of information?
Yes.
Sure.
Okay, so there's no chat on this, so I was unable to post any links. So what you have to do is go to the city council site, the board docs, and go to the January 24th regular city council meeting, and it's item 2.01. And there's several documents on there, but there is the memo from the redistricting committee to council that is, I think, what you should read. And I don't think that that memo is particularly bad. Some people were unhappy with it, but I'm not. And I did add an addendum to it. And I won't go into any of the details, but I went into detail in my addendum. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. All right, Jeff.
All right. So Bob, can you shed some light on this from the state side?
Maybe I should start with an apology, because at the kind of the last minute, we threw a big wrench into the works by throwing Burlington an 11th representative to the state government. And you know, on the 8th, I got called into a meeting that basically, I'm paraphrasing, but it said, we've got an extra person that we don't know where to put. We're thinking about, and I gave it the thumbs up pretty quickly. Barbara Rachelson's district up by UVM, the ward kind of ambiguous thing is going to be expended. That'll be a 2-person district. There's 1 incumbent, 1 empty seat. So that'll be something that'll be taken up. And pretty much the rest of the wards in town, except for those that bump up against that particular district, will remain the same. Ours, both 6-1 and 6-2 here, will remain the same. That's sort of the quick nod.
Okay.
I guess just a quick follow-up to that. I just want folks to understand that that the ad hoc redistricting committee is specifically focused on the ward boundary jurisdictions within the city, and Bob's committee at the House Government Ops is really dealing with the report from the Legislative Apportionment Board, which deals with the state representative boundaries. And when these 2 processes conclude this year or next, then we will all have to get used to a new set of overlapping boundaries between our wards and our state rep districts, so we can go back to being confused all over again about where we're supposed to vote.
Or who knows, you might all just come together.
Unless city council decides that they want to have 11 councilors and have 1 ward that has a single councilor ward, then we could have identical maps, but I would not want to be in that ward that has only 1 councilor.
Oh, and I guess I should add, sort of in closing, that the other concept that was pretty widely rebuffed in the ad hoc redistricting process was the concept of at-large city councilors, where city councilors would be essentially elected citywide, and everybody that participated in this process was really much more interested in maintaining their representation affiliated with their local neighborhoods.
Quick questions from Mark and Sarah.
This is more just a comment. 2 other things that are, I think, more minor, but floating around in possibilities with the charter change would be a charter change that would allow the city the next time to do the redistricting without having to go to the legislature. There's a number of communities that do that, and we can't do it until we get a charter change, so we can't do it this time. But when we're all around here 10 years from now or less, not having to deal with the legislative timeline would be very helpful. And that's what got us a little bit in trouble now, because we have to go to the legislature. And then the other thing, and somewhat even more minor than that, but is the potential of maybe being able to combine polling places so that we don't have necessarily to have one in each separate ward, but they could be more joint. So, and again, we haven't discussed that at all, but I want you to be aware of that.
I'll be super quick. And I want to say, I know Robert called himself a schlub earlier, but we appreciate your advocacy and your expertise on all matters redistricting. And with regard to the legislative apportionment board maps, Bob, is there still wiggle room now to massage out any of the warts, or are we done? Or was that date of the 15th of February a hard deadline? We're not clear on that. And would you take comment from individual counselors? I know I've suggested that that I like the map, but there are warts, as Robert's pointed out. And do we have an opportunity to correct any of those?
Robert sent the wart list in. It was reviewed by a couple of the people that were intimately involved in drawing the lines. And I think the consensus sort of was good enough, and locked it in and moved on. At this point, we're starting to write the actual bill that will go. So I hate to say this, but I will say this, probably too late to be putting any word X on any maps.
Okay, thank you.
And I have a couple more things to say if you can give me 30 seconds. Not about this one.
Okay.
Okay. We done with redistricting?
Jeff, Robert, we're good?
Yeah. Bob, you got the floor.
I'm good.
Okay, I'll hit this real fast. Over the last 2 days, I've sort of shepherded Just Cause and the thermal charter changes through the legislature, both passed and are off to the Senate now. I have a note here that driving down North Avenue is like being a fullback trying to get up through a crowd of defensive players. And that's just a side note. They mentioned in the school presentation about lack of teachers. On Friday, if you want to tune into something, we'll be discussing a bill in GovOps that will allow teachers who have retired to come back into service for up to a year without sacrificing their retirement benefit. And the only thing that remains of the last meeting's charter changes is RCV, ICV, whatever CV it happens to be being called. And at this point, we have no schedule to take it up at all. So it might get snuck in someplace between finishing what we're doing with redistricting and a couple of other things that are kind of high on the priority thing, but I'm not seeing it jumping right to the top of the heap. And I think it's going to be complicated. No mas.
All right. Thank you, Bob Hooper. Any questions for Bob? All right, we went over a little bit. Thank you, everybody, for your time and being part of your NPA. We need new members. And I'm talking to you, Deb. I know you were thinking about it, Deb Booten. And I did see Bridget earlier, and I know she was thinking about it, and I know we have others, but if you think of anyone or you would like to become involved, let us know.
Yeah, thank you. I'm in system overload right at the moment, but maybe soon. Thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate it, Jeff. Thanks.
Thanks. Good night, everybody.
Night. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.